This video is part of my 14-day challenge where I'm comparing iOS and Android using an iPhone 6 Plus and a Google Nexus 6. I did a previous video where I compared the hardware and software of iOS and Android. This video is going to go into how some of the apps compare to each other. And I'm going to compare just a few apps that I use regularly and just talk about the differences. Now let me say, with almost every major app that I use, I have found the same one on Android and iOS. Most of them look the same. Some of them will behave a little bit differently. The buttons are in different locations, and I'll show you on my Strava app is probably the best example of that. But for example, CNN, I'll open up the CNN app on both phones. They both open up pretty quick. Actually, the iPhone has a little graphics there that comes up. Now, I've noticed on iOS some of the graphics work a little bit better, or have graphics that are just a little bit nicer. For example, in the CNN app, you'll see the kind of how the photo just kind of fades away as the title comes up. With Android, everything just scrolls up together. However, if you look on Android, if you look at the bottom, the way the new articles come up, you'll see they kind of roll in. That's kind of cool. On iOS, they don't. So apps will just behave differently. Both of these have the hamburger menu at the top to bring over things. I think both of them you can swipe over and get to. Actually, you can't on that. Android, you can swipe over usually from the left, and I've noticed that carries through with a lot of apps. So again, I'm swiping over here. If I swipe, it kind of goes to the previous article or the next article. So again, things will behave a little bit differently in apps. And let me go to, for those of you who are on my channel who are cyclists, because a lot of my videos are cycling related, let me open up the Strava app on both phones. So on the Strava app, this is a good example of how a lot of iOS apps have icons at the bottom, whereas on Android, they're more stored over up here, either in a menu that you can swipe over from the left or tap on the top left to get a drop down. I actually prefer the Android style because you get more information on the screen. So let's go to feeds. So let's go to activity feed on both. And let me go to mine so I don't show a bunch of my friends on here. And let me show this hike that I did yesterday, a little 3.8-mile hike with the family. Now you'll see the screens look a lot different. Now, I don't know if this app is just not optimized for the iPhone 6 Plus yet or not, but the maps and things at the top and the graphs are so much smaller here. And this is probably the biggest difference, or the app that shows the biggest difference in the way things look. Most iOS and Android apps look really similar. Again, like I said, the graphics work a little bit better sometimes on iOS, but this, these graphs it's so small up here because if you got all your segments down here, whereas on the Android, I'm able to go to my graphs and things, and they just fill the screen better. So, and let me mention this: I've heard that iOS apps, they really have to be optimized for every screen size. So a lot of apps out there have not been optimized, particularly for the iPhone 6 Plus. So they look a little bit kind of stretched out. Whereas Android, because there's so many different phones, the software is able to adjust the app a little bit easier to the screen size. Again, that's things that I've read about the different apps. But this particular app, really shows how things can look different. And so I prefer the Android app a lot more to the iOS app. And while I'm on this app, let me talk about something that is really important for me, and that is the maps on the Android phone versus the iOS phone. The base map obviously is Apple Maps in the Android on the iOS device, and the base map here is the Google Maps. And so when I'm using Strava, I may need to look on the map to see where I'm at And I totally prefer Google Maps. A lot of times there'll be a trail, and I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little, you can see a fire road that runs along here. And you know, if you're on a hike and you need to pull up the map, that's something that's really important, because you might need to take a shortcut out. A lot of times I find on the Apple Maps, you don't get the detail. I was on a family hike a couple days ago, and it was just a white map, whereas the Google map, because I was running Strava on both, the Google map was able to show me some different fire roads and things like that that weren't on the Apple Maps. So that's probably one of my biggest complaints is on iOS, you can't change things like default maps. Yes, I can bring up Google Maps, I've got it on the phone, but the base map in different apps, for example the weather app or the Strava app, is different on both devices. Now this is just a good example. I've had a notification come in from Amazon, and I've got this little icon, so I know that I've got a notification. I know I'm going back to my notifications, but again, something really nice. Let me just, since I've got a notification, let me give you an example here. So I can just swipe that away, and I don't know if I've got that notification that came in on here. No, I don't, but I'm going to swipe this away and get rid of that notification too. So again, that's an example of two different apps that work differently on both phones. I have noticed that graphics are a little bit smoother, like I mentioned before, and this is an example using the Weather Channel app. So I've got a map pulled up with something on the radar. So I'm going to hit play on this one, and it starts doing it immediately, and it's very smooth. Now I'm going to do it on the Android phone, and then it's going to ask me if I want past or future, but the graphic just doesn't seem to be as smooth, and it seems to load slower on this phone. I have one app that there's a function that does not work on my Android device that does work on iOS. This is a Gateway Church app that you can watch different messages. So if I've got a message pulled up, and if I click on watch on my Android phone, I get this little thing here that says there was a problem loading your content, whereas it works just fine on iOS. Now I can do the listen function, and it works fine on both. But that's something, you know, I don't know exactly why. You know, a lot of people have talked about how iOS is, you know, there's only a few devices that apps have to, or app developers have to develop for, if that's why. But that's probably the only app that I've found that doesn't, you know, work on my Android phone near as well as it works on iOS. Most major apps, again, they both work well, and there's some subtle differences between the two. Now, I do have some apps that are not available actually for my Nexus 6. I had a Nexus 5 before that, and the app was available, and one of them is the Redbox app, so where you can get movies from Redbox. The app is just not out yet for the Nexus 6. Another one that I use a lot is it's an ESPN app called Champ Drive that is I used a lot during football season, and it's just not available for my Nexus 6 yet. Hopefully it'll come out soon. I really don't understand why, but I've found just a couple apps that I can't get on my Nexus 6 that I actually used to get on my Nexus 5. Gmail works well on both phones, but in the iOS version I cannot add any kind of Exchange account. So I'm in the screen where you can add an account, and you can see on the Android device I can add a Google account, a personal account like an IMAP or a POP account, or an Exchange account. If I do it on iOS, I can only add a Google account from what I can tell. I did mess with this for a while, tried to add my work account on here, which is an Exchange account, and I could not do it. So that is that shows how there are some Google apps that do work better on Android. For the most part, the Google apps work the same on both devices. Again, there's a few differences in the way things work. Google Now on both phones, the Google Now on the iOS phone will not show as many cards as it does on the Android version. So I've got all kind of stories to read, and And I don't have a lot on here, but this morning I looked and I had a lot more cards on the Android phone than I did on the iOS. Also, Google Now is not as integrated into the hardware, and so you can't say, open an app or different other kind of things that would control more of the hardware and software in the phone. It's more towards your search, your calendars, things like that. Now, reminders, you can set reminders on both. However, on the iOS, I have not found that you can set recurring reminders on the iOS phone. And also, my recurring reminders that I have set on my Android phone don't come up on my iOS phone. So let me go into settings here, and it's a little more clunky in the iOS phone to get around in Google Now, but if I go to reminders, I have a recurring reminder on my Android phone that does not even show up here. Also on the iOS phone, what's really interesting is if I had reminders that were in the past, I can clear them all on the iOS phone. On the Android phone, I actually have to clear one by one. So I actually prefer that on the iOS. So it's kind of interesting that that feature works better on iOS. But again, for the most part, the Google apps are going to work about the same between both phones. One thing that is different about Google apps on the iOS phone is that you cannot make purchases for things like books and magazines and movies. There is an app, and I've got it open on both phones. So this is the Google Play Movies app. But you can see on the iOS phone, there is not the shop option that you have on the Android phone. So you cannot purchase movies from the app. You would have to go to your PC, or there's a way that you can do it on the iPhone, and I'll show you here. So I've used a browser, and I use Chrome, but I think you can use Safari too. And I've gone to play.google.com/store. And it's kind of app-like in the way it looks. And so I can actually go to my movies here, and now I could look for a movie. So let's just find one that's here, Into the Woods. And you can see, just like I could do on the Google Play app, I can either buy it or rent it. So let's do the same thing. So it's really similar. So I can rent from $4.99. I could click there, and I could do high definition or standard definition. And once I do that, I could go back to the app, and it would be there in My Movies. So if I go to My Movies here, I would be able to see it. So that's a way that you can get around it, but it's obviously a little bit more convenient just to purchase it right from the app. Now, once I do have it in My Movies, I can still stream it to my Chromecast. So I've got a little Chromecast icon, and I got Gibbs Chromecast, and I could just click on that and show it on Chromecast, just like you can on the Android phone. Now, the one thing that you can't do on Chromecast that you can do on an Android phone is you can cast your screen. So if I swipe down twice to my quick toggle settings there, I've got cast screen, and I could cast that. But for the most part, Chromecast will work well on both devices. One thing that I've found really interesting is in the Facebook app on iOS, it will not rotate. So I do not have rotate lock on. I'll show you in the control center there. That's not on. And so it won't rotate, whereas on the Android phone, I get a rotation, which is kind of odd to me because I've read that from developers, having apps rotate is easier to develop in iOS than it is on Android. So there's an app that works a little bit differently on Android in that you can rotate the Facebook app. Let me talk about messaging real quick. iMessage is pretty cool in that you can send a message to an email address, a phone number, things like that. Whereas Android, you've got the text message app and Hangouts. Now you can send SMS through Hangouts. I have them separated. But for Hangouts, someone has to have a Google account. With iMessage, you can send it to any email address, which is really convenient. However, the problem with that is if you were to switch to an Android phone and someone's trying to send an iMessage to you through an email address and not a phone number, you're not going to get those iMessages. So I think you need to turn that off if you were ever to make a switch over to Android. One thing cool about the iMessage, and I don't want to open this up to show all my messages, but you can send voice messages. So you can talk, it'll record your voice, and you can send that really quickly over to someone else through iMessage. The stock calculator apps work pretty well. This is it's minor, but it's major to me, and that is every Android phone that I've had, the stock calculator app does not put in commas, and that drives me crazy. I have to download a third-party calculator app for Android to have commas. So I don't know why Google does that, but minor annoyance. And that will wrap up my review of apps. There's all kinds of apps I could go into and compare, but those are just some of the ones that I use regularly that I wanted to show. Now, one last thing that I'll talk about is the phone app. I really like on iOS how you've got this voicemail button on the far right, which shows all of your voicemails. It stores them, which is really cool. On Android, I haven't found a way to do that unless you use Google Voice, which I don't use right now. I haven't had good success with that. It's something I may look into more if I keep my Android phone. But I really like how you can go into the dialer and see all your voicemails on iOS. That will wrap up my first 7 days of comparing iOS and Android in a 14-day challenge. This first week I spent a lot of time with the phones side by side, looking at the software and looking at different apps. For the next 7 days in this 14-day challenge, I'm going to leave the Nexus 6 at home and only use the iPhone 6 Plus as my daily driver. And then at the end of that, I'm going to reactivate my Nexus 6 and use it for a day just to make sure I'm going to make the right decision between these two phones. As you can tell from my videos, it's a really hard decision. I love the hardware of the Apple iPhone 6 Plus, and I'm really preferring the software of Android. So it's going to be a tough decision, but stay tuned to my channel and I'll conclude at the end of this 14-day challenge. Thanks for watching.